All right, so it looks like I'm live. I'll give some people just a minute to come in. You guys know this is normally a channel dedicated to the topic of narcissism and dealing with toxic people in general. Since the coronavirus outbreak, I've taken a pause from that kind of content and mostly been budgeting my spare time to learning as much as I can about the virus and the pandemic and keeping my family safe is pretty much just my priority right now. My channel's not hurting for narcissism content, so I've made a few hundred videos over the last few years. So my library is just fine. I want my family to be safe. I want you and your families to be safe. Uh, and I think that there's not a lot of discussions around that. So Dr. Fauci is the NIH doctor. He's basically seen as the point man for mitigating the pandemic in the U.S. And he testified in front of the Senate. It's a virtual hearing, right? So it's all, everybody's on their webcams going back and forth. I did a live video earlier on it. The hearing has finished. I've got about 7 or 8 pages of handwritten notes. And I'm not I'm trying not to be super political, but I'm going to give my opinion on certain things, just because I don't have the time nor the will to do a neatly edited video with lots of snazzy texts and bells and whistles and all of that. I'm just going to talk about what was talked about, and some of the trends that I see. One of the things that stands out to me the most about the hearing is they keep mentioning two things: contact tracing and surveillance. It keeps coming up over and over again. What contact tracing is some of the Asian governments that mitigated the pandemic early on use cell phone records, cell phone data, cell phone contacts, geospatial data, location tracking, basically, and running that through to see who was in contact with who, and just using cell phone data to map the spread of the virus. One reason why it keeps coming up that I think is interesting is in the U.S. we had what's known as the Patriot Act. It was brought about by the War on Terror. It was discovered, I guess, how many years it's been now? Early around 2010, 2012, 14-ish. What's his name? Edward Snowden, the NSA whistleblower, blew the lid off the fact that the NSA was wantonly capturing everybody's cell phone records, phone call records, who they called, back and forth. There's also a technology called IMSI catching, IMSI, IMSI catchers. And what that is they fly an airplane over an area with a fake cell phone tower, and they basically capture cell phone data over an area, and they capture text messages and stuff. So the contact tracing, nice. The contact tracing stuff, I think kind of sort of falls into that territory. So we'll see whether or not people push back on the constitutionality of it. But it seemed to be a very pervasive, repeating theme about contact tracing and getting people's cell phone records and getting people's location data to, quote, track the virus. So that's concerning. Earlier in the last live video, there's 2 vaccines that seem to make things worse with the coronavirus. One is the dengue virus vaccine, and the other one is a vaccine I've never heard of. It's the the respiratory syncytial virus, and it's pronounced differently than it's spelled. I wrote it out like the way it's spelled, syncytial, but it's spelled SYNC, like sink, and then YTIAL. So respiratory syncytial virus, either of those vaccines, if you've had those vaccines, if you catch the coronavirus, you're probably in for a rougher ride than somebody that has not had those vaccines. But there's at least two that make things worse. The flu vaccine is not one of them, at least not that we know of at this time. It was not brought up, but it seemed to be dismissed. In terms of hope for whether or not there can be a vaccine developed, because there are viruses where there's no possibility of a vaccine or it's just been elusive, the chances are pretty good that a vaccine can be developed, and that's because based on SARS and MERS, the previous coronaviruses. A coronavirus is just a type of virus, mind you. So when I say SARS and MERS are coronaviruses, it's just they're the same family, the same species, right? Dogs, cats, horses, that kind of stuff. With SARS and MERS, we've seen that people that contracted SARS and contracted MERS, their bodies maintained the antibodies for 2 to 3 years after those infections. So there's a good chance people that do contract the coronavirus, ideally they'll have antibodies in their system for at least 2 to 3 years after that. So in terms of whether or not we can develop, quote, immunity after infection, it's not formalized, but Fauci says that we can make reasonable assumptions that there could be some form of immunity or / immune system response. But that's as far as he would go. So it's not formalized yet because they don't have the concrete data. But yeah, making reasonable assumptions. Sweden was discussed with their herd immunity approach. The takeaway from that was that their mortality rate is higher than some countries, lower than others. The jury is ultimately out on Sweden. Senator Murphy asked Dr. Fauci directly whether or not he was getting paid while he was on quarantine. He is, because he's quarantined, but he's working. Granted, there are people that are quarantined who are unable to work. Senator Murphy also said that states are being encouraged to open, but there's still no guidelines for how to go about opening. There are states that are still being pressured to maintain their quarantines. They don't have a strategy for quarantines. They're not getting any funding. So there's no guidelines and no funding for continuing quarantine, and so that's putting some states in a very tough position. Elizabeth Warren actually was a very, she used her 5 minutes very, very good. So Senator Warren said that there's projections that we may or may not get to 200,000 new cases a day, and she directly asked, if that's true, and he says no, we're not going to get to 200,000 new cases a day. Presently, as of today, it's May 11th, 12th, something like that. It's a Tuesday. Right now, we're at 25,000 new cases per day, 2,000 deaths per day. Now, here's something that's concerning. They've said that a second wave coming this fall is going to be inevitable. And it's like I had said on a previous video, it's a global pandemic. It's in both hemispheres, north and south hemisphere. So it's becoming summer here in the northern hemisphere, but it's becoming winter in the southern hemisphere. Well, it's already all over the world. So we're going to see decreases up here in the northern hemisphere and increases in the southern hemisphere. But in the fall, whenever it starts to switch again, there's going to be an uptick in the fall. And so there's some concern about the school year starting. I'll get into that. Now, Fauci made a statement that I thought was noteworthy. He says that the projections for the fall, he says that if we do not continue our proper management and mitigation, such as social distancing, facial masks, if people just continue to be stupid, for lack of a better term, then that's going to make the fall worse. And that's common sense, right? So if people just don't stop thinking, then the falls, the more idiots we have running around, the worse the fall is going to be. Is the takeaway from that. So if people do that, then it's going to be bad. As far as children in school, the risk versus benefits. The risk of kids going to school and getting sick. They're discussing how that weighs against the risk of children missing even more school, completing a full, close to a full year without formally going to schools, and what the effects on education is on that. I'm a former teacher. I think that the majority of kids are going to be fine. I don't know that, even if they're missing this much school, I don't think in the long run it's going to be that big of a deal. All right, Robert, I see your question. Was anything mentioned about false positives? No. The reliability of the test wasn't really discussed a whole lot. This is mostly in these hearings, and if you watch these hearings, each senator gets about 5 minutes, and they spend about 3 of those 5 minutes looking good for YouTube. Every senator that goes, they follow this script for their sound bites for YouTube. As a matter of fact, one senator, I've got her name written down here. Senator Smith from Minnesota spent all of her time kissing Dr. Fauci's ass. Like, literally, her first question was, Dr. Fauci, nobody's bothered to ask you, but how are you holding up, right? And just want you to know that there's a lot of people who are, thinking about you, and we all appreciate the work that you're doing. And she spent all of her time just brown-nosing him. So the state of Minnesota thanks you, Senator Smith, for spending all of your 5 minutes kissing Fauci's ass. Nothing was really mentioned in terms of false positives or the quality of the tests. There were some good points made about the reason for the delays in getting testing up and going. I'll get to that in just a second, because I want to sort of follow the order of my notes here. So we talked about Senator Warren. Dang it, I just missed somebody's comment. I think that was you, Robert. Let me see if I can pull that up. No. Sorry, I'm new to this whole live thing, so it's tough. Kansas agriculture is suffering because of China. Blah, blah, blah. So there was some comparisons between South Korea and the U.S. about how they're similar economies, and how the U.S. has the 7th highest death per capita in the world right now. And the difference between South Korea and the U.S. was that South Korea rolled out testing immediately and right away. And the reason for it is that the testing that South Korea did was 40 times. Sorry, I just had to block a phone call. I hope this is still going. Let's see, where was I? Oh, yeah. South Korea did approximately 40 times more testing than the U.S. in the beginning. Blah, 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 contact tracing. Let's see. Oh, the CDC spokesperson, I think that was Dr. Redfield, said that in the very beginnings we had contact tracing programs, but that it got overloaded really quick. So I don't know what that necessarily means, but is basically we tried and failed, which is not surprising for anything federal government. There were a lot of plugs for Medicare for all, healthcare, Obamacare. So there was a lot of political back and forth about all that. Senator Kane from Kansas was making a sell for Medicare for all. Senator Murkowski from Alaska basically said, up here in Alaska, we're cool. We're doing contact training, or tracing, sorry. I can't read my own handwriting. Redfield, so with Senator Murkowski, they're making the case that the difference between success and failure is with contact tracing. The CDC says they're ready to deploy 500 workers around the U.S. to help assist the states. If they need to ramp that up to 1,000, they're going to. Let's see here. Senator Hassan. Yeah, there's more comparisons to South Korea and how South Korea did it right and we didn't. Um, Let me skip forward here. Nursing homes, elderly. Senator Scott from South Carolina highlights the fact that the populations most at risk are blacks, Hispanics, and elderly, and brings up a very interesting point. The majority of nursing homes are staffed by employees who are black and Hispanic. So overwhelmingly, nursing homes have black and Hispanic employees. I can testify to that because my wife is Hispanic. She's like from Mexico, like the area where the Mayan pyramids are. So she looks Mayan. She is Mayan, if you want to get technical. But the thing is you've got three high-risk populations altogether in nursing homes that's been identified as a major potential for hot spots, if you will. When you have a high risk population taking care of a high risk population, that's really not good. They're pushing to have all 1 million. So in the U.S., there's 1 million nursing home residents and employees approximately. So they're looking at getting all of them tested all at once and coming up with a good testing protocol to keep that in check. In New York, so some New York statistics as of right now, 90% of deaths in New York all had underlying health issues. 2/3 of the fatalities in New York were the elderly. And I made this handwritten note, and I think this is a very good question to ask, is why is death our metric? If you look at previous health crises that we've had, like for instance, during the Obama administration, obesity was a major concern, right? Children obesity. Michelle Obama had her school lunch program. When you think about it in the past, the previous health crises that we've had various metrics. So we know that the coronavirus causes a number of different health impacts, and we're still discovering all of this stuff as things unfold. It's a novel virus, so as I said before, we really don't know dog shit about it. We're learning every single day as this progresses. But a good question that I have that I think a lot of people need to ask is, why is our metric death? That seems to be a very bad, very bad way of measuring success. And that was even brought up. Senator Scott in South Carolina says that this is a false dichotomy, and that's an interesting way of putting it. It's a false dichotomy between whether or not they choose to save lives or whether they choose to save the economy. So it's lives versus economy. And Fauci makes the point that if we have a bad fall coming up, it could reverse all the progress that we made by reopening. So yeah, we have quarantine. We've hurt a lot economically. We did this pause. We're going to reopen everything for the summer, and then when the fall gets here and it comes back, it could potentially be worse than what we're going through right now if people are not careful and if the safeguards are not put into place. So that was all the talk around that. Let's see here. Romney also had a really good run, but he touches on pretty much everything that I just talked about. I'm trying to speed things up here a little bit. Yeah, so there's a timeline from January 24th to March 5th between the time Wuhan shut down and the time that there was a federal government response. The reason why, so some of the reasons that were brought up as to why it took so long to get testing online and going in the U.S., there were certain limitations. For one, it's hard to develop a test when they don't have any actual coronaviruses. This is a video that I noticed. They've mentioned this before. If you go to the April 23rd, 2020 Coronavirus Task Force press conference, they mentioned this, that so far, a lot of in the beginning there were no actual viable copies of the actual coronavirus that they could use to develop a test. And whenever they did get them, there wasn't a lot because it was just now arriving here, and you know, it's hard to develop a test against a virus when you don't have the virus. I think we got plenty of it now. Whether or not that's a valid reason or a valid excuse, I'm not going to speculate on that. That's just what was said in the meeting. Something also concerning is, in order to speed things up with the development of a vaccine, they're talking about cutting through a lot of the red tape to get the vaccine pushed out faster. That can backfire, and even Fauci says as much. There's a real risk of it if you just try to just sling stuff out there too quick. Fauci is also, from back in the 90s when the AIDS epidemic was going on in the U.S., Fauci developed a number of protocols for AIDS and the treatment of AIDS. And they're resurrecting a lot of his work with AIDS and sort of applying it in parallel. So we're going to be seeing parallels in the way that AIDS was handled in the 90s to the way that we're going to be moving forward over the summer and fall. So we'll have a basis of comparison for that. As far as antibody treatments, and there's a good buzzword that they're using called therapeutic interventions. Therapeutic interventions, I think, is going to be the code word for experimental treatment. Therapeutic interventions include getting plasma from coronavirus survivors, getting the plasma, getting the antibodies from the plasma, and then giving it to people who are newly infected. So they're calling that convalescent plasma and antibodies. They're also looking at some of the ways that they treated AIDS, so and the ways that they boosted people's immune systems early on after they contracted HIV to help offset and prevent the development of AIDS. So again, they're pulling some of they're pulling pages from Fauci's AIDS playbook and evaluating that. Lastly, let me see how much more I have. I know this is taking a while, and I see my number of viewers going up and down all the time. All like almost a dozen of you. Thank you guys for hanging around. So Senator Rosen from Nevada asked really good questions, and she was the one that was asking about the antibody treatments and the therapeutic interventions. Good question she asked. What does the next generation of PPE look like for people? You know, masks, gloves, handkerchiefs, that kind of stuff. And I really raised an eyebrow at how Fauci responded to this. Fauci says that social distancing so far is the best PPE for the general public, and I think that's just a big pile of shit. That's just my opinion. It's like, how can you protect yourself? Oh, you know, just social distancing. Really? Because we can't do anything better? No. You know, and in regards to that, it's like I said, exercising critical thinking skills and really take your news sources seriously. I think a lot of people just don't give serious consideration to who their sources are. I think a lot of people just kind of listen to the background noise in the grapevine and just kind of sort of trust and hope that there's other people paying better attention than they are. We can call that information free riders. All right, so people that just are kind of on the information train, but not really, just hoping that somebody else is going to tell them the important stuff. But really, for all of us and for everybody that watches my channel, I really encourage taking charge of your situation, take charge of your information sources. Instead of listening to somebody telling you what the news is, which is ironic because I'm making this video, but what I'm saying is go to the actual sources. They live stream this stuff all the time. The White House has a YouTube channel that is always live streaming stuff. and it's unedited, unnarrated, uncommented. It's just straight up. They just hit record like I'm doing now and just point the camera at whoever's talking, and they go. C-SPAN also does it, but they have some commentary. And then from there, I've seen NBC for sure does not show everything. NBC never shows the slides that they put up when they present. And I think that's a big problem because people that watch NBC don't actually get to see the data. They don't actually get to see what everybody else in the room is seeing, and I think that's really bad. ABC is basically the same way. But as I said, the White House channel is one of the really good ones. And it's weird, every time they live stream something, there's never more than a few thousand viewers. And I think that's really backwards. I think if you want to know what's going on at the White House, watch their live stream. It's literally the same stream as NBC and ABC and CNN. It's pretty much the exact same stream from the same camera. So let's see. Yeah, next generation PPE. Yeah, social distancing. So basically, we don't say shit. Oh, nice. Corbett Report and Dollar Vigilante. I'll have to look into those. They sound like my kind of people. Something else Fauci said that I raised an eyebrow at is when he said whenever it comes to masks, they don't like to use the term mask because every time they say mask, it encourages people to go out and buy the PPE that doctors and hospitals need. So they're now changing the term to facial covering, which is a mask. And it makes me think of that movie with Tom Hanks. God, the one where he had to wear the mask and they called it a facial prosthetic. And he's like, oh, well, thank God for that, because for a second I thought you were talking about a mask. You know? Yeah, cover your face, cover your mouth. Whenever you go out, use common sense. Before you go out, just think, there's something deadly out there. Could I catch it? Stop and just seriously dedicate about 5 seconds of thought to what you're doing before you do it. Let's see, Leffler was the last one that I made notes about. The CDC has a Gantt chart, which is like a waterfall chart, kind of sort of it's like a project planning chart on how they intend to roll out these measures over time. So I haven't had a chance to look at it, but it's there. CDC has a Gantt chart for their proposed timeline for testing and reopening and all things CDC. Dr. Redfield, I think he was with the CDC, was directly asked what he thought about how China covered up information in the very beginning and how they gave everybody some misinformation. And Redfield, basically, he didn't deflect, but he just talked blah, 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 about a bunch of stuff that didn't matter. And then at the end, he said, on a scientific level, we had good interactions, but that really doesn't, that doesn't speak to anything, political communications I can't comment on. So he didn't really want to talk about that. Lastly, Leffler asked a direct question to all of them. Fauci, Redfield, Hahn, that asked directly whether or not they had an oppositional, an oppositional relationship with Trump and the Trump administration. All of them came back unanimously saying, no, there's no confrontational relationship. What we do is that we give advice, opinions, recommendations, we give data, and so basically they provide data, they provide guidance on how to interpret the data, and then they give their advice and their opinions on it, and then they hand it off to the administration, and however the administration chooses to use it is up to them. So that was the unanimous response by Fauci, Redfield, and Hahn to that question. So with that being said, the takeaway from all of this that I was really disappointed in, there was no discussion around how to tell, what to tell people to do to take care of themselves. Everything was based around what can we do? The people are helpless. What should we do to help the people? There really wasn't a whole lot around how can we empower our citizens to make better decisions, take care of themselves. What are they doing right? What are they doing wrong? What can I take back to the people to tell them? Now, a lot of it was, you haven't done enough. Why haven't you done enough? When will you do enough? Um, a lot of them were just putting on the red cape and S on their chest to go and be the hero, and talking about us as if we don't have brains and as if we don't think, which anyone who's been on social media, it's a fair assumption. But people just, it's not that people can't think for themselves. People are busy focused on other things that are, directly in front of their face. People have to prioritize and hack through a lot of shit. And to be quite honest, it gets exhausting trying to cut through all the bullshit that you get on social media and on multimedia in general. And smartphones are not helping us at all. So it's very exhausting. It's very exhausting. But for as long as this hearing went, nobody really seemed concerned about what message to give people to help themselves or where to go for more information. I think that's concerning. I think it's concerning that a lot of focus was placed on contact tracing. We need contact tracing. We need access to people's phones. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that the war on terror has just kind of, didn't it just kind of just suddenly just disappear? Like where did it go? What happened to it? Did we win it? Did we lose it? Where are we on the war on terror? It's just kind of just quietly just backed away into the bushes. And they've been renewing the Patriot Act. I think that there is some effort, and maybe it's well intended, maybe not. I'm not going to comment on that. But we do know that there are NSA programs that are designed to gather and collect cell phone usage data, and I think I think senators are trying to make the case for continuing those programs. And using the pandemic as another justification besides terrorism, because they haven't really been beating the terrorism drum a whole lot, not like they used to. So it's now a pandemic. The other thing I think, and again, this is personal opinion, so take it with a grain of salt. This is what I think is the fact that there was such a delay in the beginning. One of the tactics of control is to make people believe that they need you, right? And that's something that we see with narcissism and with abusive relationships. You convince somebody that they need you, that you're required, right? So back in January, I bought my masks and my PPE on January 24th. That was the day that Wuhan went into lockdown. And I got on Amazon and I bought a number of different masks. N95 respirators, that kind of stuff, because I felt that it was going to come here. And that was because I was able to do that because I was ignoring mainstream media, I was ignoring social media. I was actually literally reading scientific research journals about the virus and making my own decisions that way. I was able to get the things I needed. Nice. Yeah, Deus Ex was a cool game. I was able to get my N95 respirators January 24th, and all the way up to March, and even into March, people were still walking around saying, "Is this thing really a hoax? Is it just basically the flu?" It is so abundantly clear that the U.S. in particular is actively targeted with specific misinformation campaigns. We don't see this in any other countries. I mean, think South Korea, think Taiwan. There's not any real focus or interest in getting them, confused. But we're more connected than ever. And how is it that there's so many veins of miscommunication and misunderstanding and bad information going around in the U.S.? And I think there's deliberate misinformation campaigns being fed into social media. I'm almost to the point of recommending for people, if you want to stay safe, uninstall social media. Um, it's it's bad. It's bad. And I try to read scientific journals every day if I can. New research is being published every day. We're learning new things every day. Stuff that was a revelation a week ago is old news today. It's because it's a novel virus. We don't know. We just don't know about it. We're learning as we go. We're 60 days into having it on our shores, and that's it. So, uh, you know, I'm just that's where I'm at. That's just where I'm at. I think I, I hate to say it, but I think from the sense of from 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 political agendas, they stand to gain more by taking their time with the response and creating. So they're going to create the problem and then rescue us from it. Over and over and over, they were selling Medicare for all. Over and over, they were selling contact tracing. You mean surveillance, right? I'm not much on political conspiracy, but there is, these. There's something to be said about whenever you hear people repeating the same things over and over and over, that there's an intent there, and I'm not going to speculate about the intent. But there is intent around Medicare for all. There's intent around contact tracing. There's intent around surveillance. We know that the delays in their response were basically intentional, and now the American people need us oh so bad, and that's just the pattern that I see. If they had just knocked it out at the very beginning and never made it an issue, well, then they wouldn't be able to push these agendas like Medicare for all and contact tracing, because we wouldn't need it. So that's my thoughts, and I'm not. I try not to encourage putting the tinfoil hat on more than necessary, but as we all know, when you deal with narcissists and pathological liars, you have to kind of read between the lines and see what you see between the lines, and then sort of weigh it against reality, and think about whether or not there's some deception there. I think there's a lot more under the surface that they're just not discussing publicly, but that's just me. Anyways, I know this is long. Thank you guys for watching and indulging. I've got a group on Facebook, the Narcissistectomy group. If you're not part of the group, join it. We can talk more there. Leave some comments here on YouTube. I'm going to go back through and respond to people, and we can talk about it, and we should talk about it. Instead of being told what to think and told what to do, we should talk to each other about what we think. So thank you guys, and I'll see y'all on the next video.